One, what is women in tech? We were at that luncheon at Summit where Marie asked, I talked about rebranding, and I've since talked to her again about it. And really, the rebrand is just breaking down the barriers and the culture, media portrayal of what tech means, as it pertains to just in general, so that it's more accessible to everybody. So it's not just it's just this one small set of doors closed, heads down coders and break fix people. That it's this broader thing, like you said. Looking forward to seeing you probably in May first, but then again in probably in June again, and we'll be back up there for a Canadian regional. That was an awesome event.
Okay,
yeah, loved being up there.
Fun, so much fun. I was just blown away, and honestly, just having it on home soil as well was really cool. And it was the first time where I went really independently somewhere that was comfortable for me, and it was so nice, and everyone was just so welcoming. It was great.
To focus on imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something it's such a buzzword. I think it just kind of crept up, and then all of a sudden was a thing. I mean, it was always out there, but it had a name. And once it had a name, I kind of hear it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What is your feeling on imposter syndrome as a concept?
I actually appreciate the label, because I think that before, and understanding that it's a psychological response. And so I actually have my bachelor's degree in psychology, and that's where I started in all of this field, because I was just always so interested in people and why we reacted the way that we do, and how we act at work. And so I always kind of go back to that, where that wasn't a thing before. And I always had this feeling of, maybe I'm not doing it the right way. Maybe I'm, I was propelled very quickly into the business environment. And I started, I think my first job, it was in a medical device company when I was 18, 19. And so from very early on, I constantly felt I need to be up at a certain level. I'm not necessarily where I'm supposed to be. And I always felt as though it was just me. I was I'm the one that only thinks about this. I'm the one that's not confident. I'm the one that always needs to try a little bit harder. And then you kind of slowly start to realize, no, other people feel this way. No one talks about it, which is also one of those things where I think it's very taboo, because you feel like the more you publicize your doubt or your concern or things like that, the more or the less competent you might look.
Yeah.
And I think I definitely fell within those constructs where sometimes I wasn't really sure, or I wasn't really sure, what the next step was. And I was really scared to raise my hand or to ask a question, because, regardless of the genders that were around me, I didn't feel safe enough to call out my failures or to call out my gaps in understanding. Mm-hmm. And I think now that it has a label, it does make it easier. I literally had so much imposter syndrome, even just coming onto this podcast. I was you ruminate, right? You're just
yeah.
Oh my gosh, am I going to be comfortable? Am I going to be okay? Am I good enough for this? Am I going to be interesting? There's so many things that get in your way. But one of the things that actually going to my first speaking engagement in, when was that? At Summit. Can I talk about Summit here?
Oh, of course, yeah.
No. That was terrifying for me. I was I am going all alone.
Was that just last year? Or was
it was
last year was your first speaking?
October.
In October, yeah.
It was I was so scared. I was like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Like, I left my corporate job and I'm following a passion and it's something that I love to do. I also realized I love speaking, like, love speaking. And so I'm doing something I want to do. I knew a total of three people. Yeah, I knew a total of three people going in. And that's it. And I was like, okay, I booked my flight, I booked my hotel. I showed up the first day. I knew nobody. I tried to, like, be open, but I was so scared. I was like, do I belong here? Like,
Mm,
all of these people are so, embedded, or on, especially when it comes to technology, for me particularly, I'm not on the technical side. I'm I am a woman in tech, but I don't do tech. Like, I
yeah,
support tech and I support the people who use the tech, and I advocate for the tech, and I, create opportunities and streamline processes and do things where it's just like, hey, this is good because. And so it was so scary, but I left that week. And honestly, I still talk to this day about your party, where it was just this, like, euphoric moment because it was the kind of end, right?
yeah.
Like, the
It was
last
like the
day.
last day, I think, like, or the night before the last day. Yeah,
And it was, I mean, I think it was like a mix of, like, the 80s vibes and all of these things. Like, it was like a much music video, like a dance party where you had the videos and all that stuff. And everyone was just like, just yourself. And I felt like I could be myself. Also, like, being halfway across the world or the country without my kids, like, I was kind of like, I took myself out of, like, my mom self and put myself into this, like, just free
yeah.
spirit feeling. And I left and I was like, I feel like my cup was so full. I felt
Mm,
so accomplished and I felt so good. And it's kind of one of those things where imposter syndrome is inevitable. It's like change.
yeah,
Change is inevitable. It's going to happen. But that's when you need to lean into it and push through it and be like, I'm uncomfortable. Like, I used to teach people all the time, if you are uncomfortable, you're learning.
yeah,
That's when you become the unicorn. If you are uncomfortable, just keep going, just keep pushing through. You're gonna fail. You're not gonna do well at first, but you're gonna get there. Whatever that there is, it might not be, what you wanted it to be. But I think we forget to remind ourselves of that.
and that's the thing. Going back to what you said, when there isn't a name, sometimes it's hard to associate it. So you don't know to share it. You don't know to potentially lean into it. And so,
Mhm.
as weird as it is, sometimes giving it a name helps to, you know, community, bring it to community so that you can lean on your peers when you need to help prop you up. But I think the most important thing you said to me was not being afraid of it. Anyway, let's start. Just introduce yourself real quick to the audience and everybody out there in the dynamics world.
Sure. So I'm Stephanie Lavinskas, and I am the Chief Change Enthusiast for Lavinskas Consulting. Something fresh and new in my world of coming into the consulting world and really helping companies understand the aspects of the people on these projects and making sure that there's that fun element and kind of more. My motto is stop looking down and look up. So in all these projects, stop looking down at your Excel sheets and your PowerPoints and all of these things. Look up at the people around you, because that's where you're going to get your most insights. That's when you're going to get your aha moments. And so
Mm-hmm.
those are just the things that I really try to encourage.
Awesome. And this is a fairly new venture, because when I met you, you were either just sunsetting off of an end user role or consulting with an end user. And
Yeah,
then, so is this a new venture that you're consulting?
it is brand new. So since October, I want to say,
Yeah.
and I signed my first contract. But yeah, it's really just been since the summer. I worked previously for the Heiko companies, and I was the director of OCM there, and I led 18 implementations with them globally, and it was such a cool experience. And D365 is not something that I thought I would fall in love with by any means. I've
Yeah.
always been in the IT space, so I used to implement LMS systems for companies. So I was always in the training side of things, HRIS, things like that. And then when I joined the Heiko companies, it was just a small, like, piece of my portfolio, managing change for D365.
Mhm.
And I could never have imagined at that point that it would propel me to where I am now, where I'm so indebted and grateful of the community that I've found and what I've been able to learn, because in 2 short years, I did, 18 implementations and really got to learn a lot and learn my style and the things that people are looking for and the things that we need. And so currently right now in my 19th, and
Awesome.
and I'm learning more. What I find the most interesting now about the role that I'm in, before I was in a global role where I, I was, I was a director. So you kind of have people a little bit more on the ground that are doing the day-to-day work. Now
Hmm.
in my role, I'm doing the day-to-day work, and I'm in the office 3 days a week, and I'm in front of people, and I'm walking into the shipping department, and I'm doing all of these things. And I have learned so much, even just about the product in
Yeah.
the last couple of months than I had in those 2 years. So it's almost going back to basics for me, which I like, because I took on that large role midway through an implementation. So
Mm.
this, I'm going back to the 101 of like the walk, run, crawl, or crawl, walk, run, tongue
Yeah.
twister. Or like I'm learning to crawl all over again. I'm getting all of those
Yeah.
like those reflexes down and understanding, and it really has given me so much perspective, and it's been really fun.
And it goes back to what you said too. When you're looking up, you're learning, and you're not looking down and kind of focused too hyper focused on one thing on paper or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're just wide open to this new education in any increment. Even if you're the most seasoned warehouse expert, if your eyes are open and you're listening to people, you're going to learn. I guarantee you're going to learn something somewhere along the way.
Yeah. And you're going to lead. Like people are going to want to follow you.
Any point where you felt like the imposter syndrome was almost too much?
Yeah. It's it's very overwhelming, and I think last year is when I probably hit my peak. My responsibilities and my portfolio and things at work was rising, and I was in a tech world where, again, not that people are saying that you're not doing your best work, but everyone's a critic, right? That's just the way that the world works.
And our own worst critic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like most likely, I will cringe to rewatch this podcast, but I will watch it. But I think that I was really going through it, and I, remember something very specifically. I was actually away with my husband at the time. We were taking a long weekend for my birthday, and I had to send something, and I sent it, but I don't know, it didn't send, it wasn't like perfect and all that stuff. And so all of these things then occurred, and I internalized it so much, thinking I was the issue. I can't believe I did that.
Mm,
I really started to ruminate, and it affected me so much on a physical level, where
yeah.
thank God I was away. Thank God I was with my husband and like with no kids. So I was able to really think about it. And with him, because it was just the two of us, I was able to talk about it. So he was like, well, what really is it that bothers you?
Mm,
And it really kind of made me realize that it's not the outside, it wasn't the outside criticism, because I like constructive criticism. Like it also depends on who it's from. I think sometimes you have to
yeah.
think about, is it coming from somebody I trust, or is it
Yeah.
coming from somebody who, it's not that I think that they're against me, but they are, very vocally maybe like against me, or they don't necessarily want me to succeed. And I think that that's
Mm,
when it gets very tricky. And I'm not going to lie, like I don't necessarily at that time had very many tools or things to really pull me through. It was more I had to kind of almost go down to my lowest level and then build back up
mm,
and say, no, maybe this wasn't my best foot forward, but it's one foot in, like, it's
yes.
in the bucket. And,
Yes.
I think that's the kind of thing where you again, and you're so in your head, we're saying things out loud. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was all about like stress response and things to do. And there was this tool that I thought was fantastic, where if you take over 3 days, you take 20 minutes each day, and on the first day, you really just talk about what was the trauma that you experienced. And on the second day, it's how did it make you feel? And then on the third day, you talk about like you write down what are the things that you would do differently.
Mm,
All of a sudden, it just kind of breaks it down, and it doesn't make it feel as scary. And I actually tried it last week on something that happened. And then I shredded the papers, but I thought, wow, when I say it out loud, it's actually not that bad.
Yeah.
It's fine. And I was watching obviously the Super Bowl on Sunday, and it made me think because I thought, we experience imposter syndrome because we feel like we just always need to be the best. We always need to do things in the right way.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're failing at ourselves, we're failing at our company, or whoever it is. And it was just interesting because the Eagles, when they won, everyone rushed the field, and but then you have this other team that walks away, that
Mm.
leaves, that's sad, that's kind of having this other feeling. And I think because of the situation of like the Chiefs going in and wanting that three-peat and like having it, you felt for them. And I
Mm.
felt, I was like, not that we need to film them in the locker room, but we see this. We see the Eagles. We see how they
Yeah.
feel. And we always strive for that feeling. But the Chiefs, like, you think they're going to come back next year and not like kick more butt? Like, they're like, no, like, yes, fine. Like, you didn't get that, I don't know what it's called, trilogy or whatever the three is called.
The three-peat. Yeah.
Yeah, but like they're going to come back with like fire and fury like next season because they're like, fine, we didn't get that one, but we're getting this one, and we're going to
Yep.
look back and we're looking and see like where did we make our misses. Where are the things that we did that we can improve on, and that's all that you can ever do. Like if you just keep beating yourself down and you don't use it as lessons learned, you're never going to move forward. So
Yeah. Like you said, if you get stuck in the depression of that one bad foot, so you put that one bad foot down, it makes a big depression, and you get stuck in that depression,
yeah,
then this is where you can get in trouble. It's just looking back and seeing that as a miss, like you said, and then just not looking back.
yeah,
You know, the best you can do is you carry with you though the learned lesson. You put that in your little in your little book or whatever to remind you, but you leave the rest behind and just crush it on forward.
yeah,
Also with social media, you hear this a lot in general social media like Facebook and Instagram, and you see always the best of everything that's going on. Typically, the idea that if I only see the best of somebody else and I see the worst of myself, that I also kind of pull further back and further away.
for sure. I think I deleted Instagram about 3 weeks ago for that exact thing. And I think also because you're just looking for that dopamine hit, right? Like I even changed the background of my phone to it's like grayscale. So none of my apps are colorful. Nothing is like driving me towards it. And because I found that I was in this vicious cycle of if I was overwhelmed, I would go to Instagram and I would just go on the reels and scroll. And I would also do it on LinkedIn because I was like, oh, I'm more professional. It's like, it's fine, but the same posts and people would come up and I'm like, oh, they're doing so good. Like they're posting so much. Should I be posting more? But like
Right.
but it's like I forget, or I created a content calendar and then I didn't do it because I was nervous because I was just kind of like,
Yeah.
oh, like I don't want
You
to put
start
myself
posting and
out
you don't
there.
get likes. Like all of a sudden, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't get any likes on this post. Why? It's really a vicious thing to
Yeah.
try to manage emotionally
It's
and kind of detach from it. It's like, I don't care. I'm just going to post on it. And like it, don't like it. I just I feel like I'm getting good stuff out. And that's kind of my driving factor.
Yeah, like we always feel like we have to hide behind stuff, and I think that like even on Instagram, this trend of faceless, faceless posts where it's just the back of your head and like things, but you don't have to see it. It's just
Mm.
this. It's just like a way to hide behind your, I don't know, it's your insecurities or your various different things. And it is though, again, it goes back to like leaning into it and pushing yourself because you're never going to know how good it is unless you try it, unless you do
Yeah.
it. But I do think that on LinkedIn, especially, there's even this, people are saying it's starting to become a little bit more social and a little bit less business oriented. But I do think that that's good because I follow Amy Edmondson. If I'm pronouncing her name wrong, I apologize. But her whole thing is kind of around psychological safety and that, like, we need to normalize the fact that people fail. And
Yes.
she comes up on my feed every so often, and I'm just like, oh, thank God. Where
Yeah.
I needed that reminder because it is like you're constantly going through. It seems like people have their SHIT together, they're creating strategies, they're talking to these people, they're doing that, they're posting videos and doing all these things. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I can barely figure out what to make for dinner tonight. Like, really? And so it's overwhelming, but at the same time, in the last couple of weeks since deleting Instagram, I try to take it as inspiration, and I think I've been pushing myself to at least comment. So I've been commenting a lot more, where I'm like, I need to have my voice be buried down first,
Mhm.
have some few people be like, yeah, I agree, or I that, where it's like it's not the main post. I
Yeah.
think and then you know what, posting about my speaking engagement at DynamicsCon, I've never gotten so many calls, or like random people where I was like, I didn't even know you follow me on LinkedIn, and like they're
Wow.
asking me about it and excited about it, and I thought, okay, like this is cool, and like even writing it, I don't like to brag about myself. I actually think it's a challenge that I have, where I always just want to fly under the radar. Like I don't want to
Yes.
be the brightest star in the room unless I'm speaking. Then I
Yeah.
will be like the biggest personality, because I that's what I want to give. I want to give that energy. But otherwise, I'm like, yeah, okay, I did
So
this. I
it's
did
so
that.
interesting to digress, but I do act. I do some acting, just local and once a year or so. But on stage, I'm a pretty big presence.
Mhm.
I'm definitely an overactor, but that's theater. And I was told early on, definitely overact until they tell you not to. So, but off stage, I am also very quiet. I tend to like to be in the back, but sometimes it's just like you said, if I'm in the room and people expect a certain thing,
Mhm.
I might be that certain thing. But ultimately, I do like the idea of just kind of, being a little bit quiet and reflective to what's going on around me too. It just, like I said, if you're speaking or something, you have to be at that next level. And I think it's a Marianne Williamson quote, and I don't know the whole thing, but the small nugget of it is, it's harder to be, to succeed than it is to fail sometimes. Like when you're successful, keeping that success up and that pressure of, man, that, like you said, that post was really good, or that session I spoke at was so popular. That means the next one has to be as or better. Otherwise, I'm going to feel that.
Yeah.
So the more you succeed, the harder it is.
Yeah. And I think it's constant. Like,
Yeah.
cheesy me, but I was watching the Disney Awards last year. I love Disney, by the way. I was watching the
Who
Disney Awards
doesn't love
last
Disney?
year, and it's something that stuck with me so much was Miley Cyrus. I don't know what she won, if it was like a lifetime achievement award, but she won a pretty big award from Disney for like Hannah Montana or whatever.
I would say she was like a big part of the early, like,
Huge, yeah.
Disney,
And then,
TV
really
shows.
kind of like broke out of that and like has become this, like mega star. And she went up and she said, if you think that I am not terrified every time I get on that stage, you're losing your mind.
Yeah.
I am scared every single time, but I push through. And
Hmm.
you are courageous if you are afraid and you push through. That's what being courageous is. And I was like, I really like that. So it's just all these things where I find that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman that says it. It does feel more affirming when it's a woman that says it, especially a younger woman.
Hmm.
I was like, okay, yeah, that's great. Like, to know that people of that stature are also terrified to do something and to, trip on stage or to, do whatever it is. It's like, it's normal. It's
Yes.
okay to do that and to be that way, and to kind of add on to what you were saying about being on stage and then being more introverted at home. I used to deliver a lot of leadership training, and with that we would do DISC or Myers-Briggs of like
Mm.
behavioral assessments.
Yeah.
Everyone has everything in them. It's just your levels are different. So even speaking, I'm the same. Like, things like this, or if I'm in person, I can talk my face off and have no problem with it. But then I love being alone, and
Yeah.
I don't always want to go to a social thing. And I want to, because it takes up a lot of my, I can do it. I can do it, no problem. But it takes up a lot of my energy.
Yeah.
So it's then I need to reset and I need to regroup. Where some people, organizing or doing, like, looking at a spreadsheet is so overwhelming because that's not their flex.
Yep.
They have to overflex to get to it, and then they're exhausted, they're tired, and then they probably didn't do as good as someone who is comfortable doing it. So then you start to have that self-doubt where it's
Yep.
like, I think one of the things for me too with this new road is I'm following a little bit more of my passion and what is my flex, like what are the things that I'm comfortable doing and I'm okay with doing, it still comes with a lot of imposter syndrome because my way of working is very, very different, I think, from what expectations are, where in the change world, people want those Excel sheets and they want the detailed plans and they want the timelines and they want the this and they want the communication plan. And it's like, I could do that and I have all the tools and I have all the templates, but at the same time, I'm like, I just want to have like a meeting and I want to meet people face to face. And I like the lean principles a lot more, where I can have this strategic canvas and a Kanban board where I'm not fixed to this whole plan that's supposed to endure the test of time with these projects that, we all
Yeah.
know they do not, always stay in the same timeline that they
They're
are.
all over the place.
Why can't I be agile? Why can't I just roll with the punches? Have, things in my back pocket, in my toolkit for milestones, for different things, but everything else, it's like you just look tone deaf if you put out a column that you wrote 6 months ago. So it creates a lot of, okay, I need to, I have to get into my brain of, no, my way is my way. There are a million other people doing the same thing that I do, some that kind of look like what I'm doing, some that don't. And I think that too has opened my eyes recently, where I follow people, I've connected with people, and I see that everyone has the same struggles and everyone has their own little unique thing that they bring to the table. And it doesn't make one other person better than me. It just, because really at the end of the day, it'll come down to who's in front of me, like the client.
Yep.
So
what have you seen when it comes to the imposter syndrome effect for women in tech as opposed to maybe a male?
So if I look back, even when I was implementing LMS systems, I was always the only woman at the table. Back then I was younger. My first job was in this large, engineering firm here in Montreal, and I was brought in as an expert for the system, and and I remember one of my first meetings, I'll never forget it. I was the only woman in the room, and there was all head of IT, all these analysts, and they were talking about something, and I said, you don't have to do it that way. You can do it. They wanted to create groups. And I was like, you can create dynamic groups, right? That you can create rules where people just go in and on all of these things. And I remember them saying, no, it's not possible. And I thought, okay, this is my first week. And I have someone who is in the process of implementing it in the, infancy stage. And I had worked with that system for over 2+ years, implementing it for somebody else. And managing it. So I thought, okay, so why am I being dismissed? And then lo and behold, 2 months later, it comes back in a meeting. It was not tethered to my idea, but I was like, oh, we're going to do dynamic groups for these, to be able to, enroll them into courses faster and XYZ. And it was the first time that I really experienced that. And I held on to it because I just thought, okay, maybe, is it me? Am I not, am I not confident in the way that I'm saying it? Am I not expressing it in the right way? But I can say that throughout my career, I was always the only girl at the table. What changed is my last year at Heiko, where there was this influx of women that came in, and not just women that came in, but women who had more confidence. And it was interesting to me because I find that the women who have more confidence, Heiko or anywhere else that I've noticed, they're the ones that get torn down more. Oh, she's too emotional, or, oh, she's overbearing, or, oh, why is she always this way? And I thought, but then I look at the men and they don't get the same comments. They get the good job, or they get the promotion, or they get the recognition. They get all of these other things. And I was kind of like, well, it doesn't make sense to me. And especially now, I have a son and I have a daughter, and I really try to make sure with my daughter where I'm just kind of like, you can do whatever you want. And you can be whatever you want. And I really try to encourage that side of her, the confidence and the things where I want her to know that her voice matters. and it's a really hard position to be in because you feel like you're always on your soapbox a little bit. And for me was especially because, again, if we go back to the definition of tech, like I am in tech, I was on an IT leadership team, but do I code? No. Do I, understand all of the jargon that I was listening to on a regular basis? No. I'm like, okay. But then I was like, no, it took me a little while to realize, I was like, that's my superpower. My superpower is that I don't understand you, and my service, I guess, is not to you, but it's to the people. So if I don't understand you, the people aren't going to understand you.
Yeah.
So I slowly again, like that imposter syndrome of what are you really worried about? Is it valid? And then can you actually harness that in a certain way and use it to your advantage, which I did. But I'll never forget that first time. And it really, it takes you back. But I do think that there are those people or men where they give certain things a bad rap, and it's unfortunate because they're usually the ones that are a little bit louder, a little bit larger.
Yeah.
But I have been super super fortunate to be a part of teams with people and men who really bring you up, and they're like, no, she's actually like the smartest person in this room, or she's the one that you need to look at, she's the one that you need to go to. But it's more competitive when you get to certain levels as well, where it gets difficult. Yeah.
And I've heard that. I've seen it too. In my end user experience, and back in corporate experiences, have seen that boardroom, that meeting room mentality, and it does take. You do have to start stepping up at some point. It didn't happen for me early in my career because I just didn't know and wasn't confident enough to maybe step up and say, "This isn't right." The way you just it maybe wasn't overt, but even those small slights, like you said, that's just I heard exactly what you said. Somebody mentioned to me not too long ago. It was a female, and she's like, I mentioned an idea, and we talked for another hour, and by the time I got around, this other person, a man, was credited with the idea. And I
Mm-hmm.
watched it happen in the room, she said. It was like I actually watched it go around like telephone, and then great job, Bill. Yeah, all right, to go, Barry. You figured this out for us, kind of deal. And you're like, she's sitting over there going, yeah, well, that was me. And then you're afraid to actually, because then you look like, you know, a dork if he's like, that was my idea, and people then are like, oh, look, whatever. So it becomes a problem to step up, but you need other people in the room to step up.
Yes.
And like I said, I've seen it where, I was, in particular, you made me think about a memory I had where a high level, like a vice president level, asked this mid-level manager, a female, her opinion on something. And then when she gave it, he said something, I'm going to paraphrase, but he used the word stupid somehow. Like, oh, that's a stupid idea. And I actually did stop. As like, come on, you just asked her for her opinion. You can't dismiss it like that. It's like, that's not fair to do that. In the room, and then to come around, like you said, and you would never say that to that guy over there. It just doesn't happen. I didn't see it. And
Yeah.
so I know that there was that bias and that way of treating people that just didn't seem like, that's just very dismissive. And why bother asking,
Yeah. No.
just
And
let it
then
fly. Yeah.
there's the follow up or follow through. I don't know what it is, but then when you leave that meeting, what happens? Like, do you have someone that reaches out to you? Do you have someone that says, hey, that wasn't cool? That would
Yeah.
help diffuse the situation. But even
Yeah.
that, like a lot of people maybe don't, they're nervous too, or they're kind of like, maybe shouldn't pick up on it, or maybe, it's okay. And I think that, again, like I was so fortunate to have people on my side, like in the last year or so, that like I really truly, credit as like more mentors, where I look up to them, the strength that they have, and I aspire to become that. But then also I know that they're my like cheerleader in the corner, where
Yeah.
I'm stressed, or if there's something going on, like I know that they will call me, and it's like a no BS type thing. And that's what I need, where it's tough love. You are good, you are fine. And like I've been, called like a million different things. And it's always, I realize too, where it's, there's this new theory, I think it's Mel Robbins or something, where it's like, just like let them, which
Mm.
is so much easier said than done. But I'm trying to implement
Yeah.
that, where it's like, listen to the words, not the tone. And someone doesn't like you, or someone, has something against it. So, okay, so let them. and like, let's move on.
I was thinking about this too when you were talking about, that experience you had in the boardroom. Do you go, these things build up, and I think there's probably a fine line, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it, of not coming into the room assuming that you're going to be attacked, but if something does happen, feeling confident to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
So if you come in with this kind of this bear on your back, and then you're going to be looking and really intent and intense, and maybe you create more than is there, but you do
Survive.
want to respond if it is there. So I think there's a balance in like being overt and being ready to correct in the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. And it's hard. So one of the biggest fears that people have is public speaking, more than death, more than getting attacked by a shark, and like, anyways, all these things, fights. Public speaking, especially in the US, is like number one.
Yeah.
Second for me, which kind of like is like just a sub bullet point under that, is spontaneous speaking. So just like at the beginning when you said introduce yourself, I cringe when I have to introduce myself because I'm like, I don't have like an internal script, and I should just have a script somewhere, where
Right.
like every time you're at a round table, it's like, everyone, let's go around the room and introduce yourself. If you're
Right.
that first person, you're like, oh God, okay, like, what do I say? What do I say? If you're the last person, you're like, he said something super interesting. She said something there. Oh, should I say that? Like you
They
start to
took my super
look,
interesting thing that I was going to say.
and then you're like, oh no. And then the same is in those moments where, kind of like what you said, where that VP was speaking to a woman. And in those moments, like I've heard so many people be like, oh, you should look at them and be like, give it a little pause. Well, that was a silly thing to say out loud. That's a weird thing to say. But like in the moment, you're so emotionally charged. And I
Yeah.
think also what's important, and that also creates more imposter syndrome, where like it's so important to know. And again, this is something that I used to teach, where when you are stressed, your body goes into this fight or flight, this like chemical reaction, and your cortisol just like spikes up really high.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard of these. They're called fainting goats. They're
Yeah.
like goats where like if a FedEx truck would come up next to, like a farm, and they would just freeze and
Yeah. Fall like right over.
because their cortisol levels go so high that their body can't absorb like all like whatever's going on. And so they just freeze. And
Can you
so
imagine that in the boardroom? Like if it happened to people, just like, just okay. Now introduce yourself, Stephanie.
my kids would love that. And so it's like, be kind to yourself, like you actually lose, if you're super stressed, you could lose like 60% of your brain function, which like seems like a really large amount, but
Yeah.
like think of how much is going on, so it's just like your amygdala like all of a sudden activates, and you're just kind of like, oh, how do I respond with like anger? And
Yeah.
it's hard to go into that like more logical space. But I do think that in the moments it's hard, but also it's because we don't practice. So again, practice makes perfect. You're never going to be good at it the
100%.
first time. I am not the best at this, but I've heard so many people where, in the mirror in the morning, you have your affirmations, or, practice different things. Like you could easily ask your partner or a friend of yours to say, hey, like every once in a while when you see me, ask me to introduce myself or
Right.
say something mean to me. And, because it's those moments where like, if you don't practice it, of course, when it happens, you're gonna be like, oh, I should have said it, like, oh,
Right.
I could have put them in their place. I could have, would have, should have. That's like
Right.
cute, like everything with like, our psyche. And so but it is hard, but it's kind of like you're going through it in the right way, where I also think that it depends on your character. If you're the type of person to be in those situations and to pipe up, like that's okay. But if you're not, that's also okay.
Yeah.
Because if I were the one to retaliate, it doesn't feel like me. And I've done it a couple times.
You remind me of a scene from um, You've Got Mail. Have you seen this
Oh,
movie?
yeah, yeah.
And there's there's a whole section where Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks are, back and forth. And she says something like, I was in the moment and I wanted to respond and I didn't know what to say. And then
Mhm.
later on, after talking more with him and kind of the practice side of it, she does. She comes up with the one line zinger that she wanted to come back on him, and it didn't feel good.
Yeah.
Like she didn't, felt out of character. And so I loved what you said about just that silent pause. I've used that so many times in areas where I felt like somebody was out of line, where it
Mhm.
didn't maybe warrant like a a literal, I got to yell at you now. It wasn't so over the, but it was enough that if I just stopped and like,
Mm-hmm.
and just give them enough of a 5 second pause to realize, because I'd say, I'm telling you 99% of the time, they know they stepped over a line.
Yes.
And just that 1 minute of pause, I didn't have to say anything, but they were like, yep, okay, I knew it, and so they stepped back, and I moved on.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And it
so
diffuses, right? Where it's like I was the other day, like if someone says something to you that's out of the blue, it'd be like if you don't respond, they want the response. They want the, like, it's like they're looking for something.
right, yeah, when they goad you with a joke or whatever, if it's and again, even if it's slightly inappropriate to the moment, it's the middle of a meeting and you make an off-color joke or whatever, it's like, okay, are we done now? Cool. I'm going to keep moving on. I mean, and you didn't get the response. I didn't, and then they stop. They realize this isn't, they
Well,
also get a feel for who you are, and they know that, hey, next time I'm in the room and I'll be more, cognizant and set and, and appropriate with Stephanie because she's, smart and she's talking and I don't need to do
mhm.
this, and so that just that. So if you, to your point, even if you're afraid to speak up, just even a slight pause
Yeah.
can be
Nice little
super effective.
smile, kill them
Yeah.
with kindness.
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you mentioned mentors too. I think that was the other important thing I wanted to ask you about before we run out of time,
Yeah.
because I think that's, again, going back to Marie's point of creating more culture and media around what women are in tech, because it makes it more accessible, because a person can see themselves, and
Yeah.
that's just in general in anything, not just women, but immigration, people of color, boys, girls, whatever. You mentioned, letting your daughter know she can be anything, letting your son know he can be anything is equally as important. What kind of mentorship, you mentioned, a bunch of ladies. I know you worked with Crystal, just stronger personalities. Did you ever seek that out, or is it just kind of happen organically,
It
for
just happened
you?
organically. And, especially Crystal, when she came in, it we were in different departments, but we were all, working on D365. And I don't know, the clinch moment, but we were working together on an implementation at one of the companies in the Netherlands, and then we ended up going on. I went for go live, and I was with her and another one of our employees, and I think it was just kind of also realizing that not ever like everyone doesn't have. I keep wanting to say, I'll say SHIT. Not everyone has their SHIT together, but no, she's rooted in her beliefs, and you can't sway her unless you have a really good argument. And I think
Yeah.
those are the things where I was like, okay, this is really cool. And we have this relationship where I don't worry to say anything to her. And I know that whatever she says to me comes with love and
Yeah.
comes with like encouragement. And I actually got the opportunity to not mentor, I guess, but like have two different discussions with two different girls who are in university and looking for, a profession in my field, or L&D. And it was just interesting because, one of them asked me 2 weeks ago, she said, what was your path, and like, how did you get where you go? And I said, it was all over the place. Like, it really, like, I led with what I liked.
Mm.
And she said, if I were to get an internship somewhere, what would be your biggest tip for me? And it was interesting to me because the way that I responded, I was like, oh, that's good. I like that response, but it kind of resonated with me where I was like, it's not that sometimes it's not always about the work. I was like, if you're going to have an internship somewhere, think about the company, think about the
Mm.
company values. But then more importantly, think about your values. Like, what do you stand for? Like, who are you as a professional person? And for me, my core value is fun. Like, regardless of
Yeah.
how that translates or what that means in the moment, it has to be fun. And if I don't have that, if I don't get that connection with, anybody, like the company or the client or a coworker, it's really hard for me to, feel more comfortable and more confident. And I think when I said that, I was just like, you kind of see it on their face where it's like, oh, that's, something I didn't think of. So, and I
Yeah.
think that that's what a mentor is supposed to do for you. It's supposed to bring out the sides of you that you don't necessarily know that's there. Like,
Hmm.
and not in a very direct way where it's not, I think people think a mentor is going to be like, okay, so for your strategy, you need to do this, 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 this,
Yeah.
right? but a mentor is really just more about, what is it that you want to do, or like how is it that you feel about the work that you're doing now, what brings you joy, like what is the things that you love about what you do, and then you can lean into that and kind of help massage those things out of you. And for
Yeah.
me, the mentorship with Crystal and this one other woman that worked at the company was really just like they were bringing out my, like, not my pit bull side, but like the side of like, you are good, like you should advocate for yourself and you should. And I was like, it's not, I'm so nervous, like, I was like, I don't know if I can. But they really kind of helped to push me through where I still don't do it at like 100%, but I do it where I'm just, a little, every time I do a little bit more.
Yeah.
I do 10% more, 10% more, 10% more. And I think that that's what's really helped me, or helped me understand where my biggest like challenges are.
Yep. And like you said, sometimes mentorship is really organic. You're just sopping up that person's, you know, space and aura. Other times, but it is intentional and one on one. I love your point. It's not talking at somebody; it's talking with them.
Mhm.
To because if you're just talking at them, you're not going to pick up the nuances, like you said, of what they really need. And so when you're talking with them, all of a sudden you're pulling back layers and uncovering fun things that you can help them with, or that they uncover themselves, just like you said,
Exactly.
through conversation. They just, that aha moment goes off, like you said, of, oh yeah, I see it now. We were just talking and we didn't really do anything. It wasn't like you were instructing me, it just happened.
Yeah.
So
But I think too, and I can appreciate too, where it's hard to find a mentor, or, who is a good mentor? Like, what do I
right.
do? And I'll always remember, I used to work for this clothing company here in Montreal called Dynamite. And there was this new VP that came in, and she, within her first week, I think, or second week, she had went to the head of HR and said, will you be my mentor? And in the sense that, it was like, the lay of the land, what's going on. It doesn't
Mm,
always have to be someone in HR. I think it could have been, someone in supply chain. It
sure.
doesn't necessarily matter, because sometimes it's not about the role, it's not about the job. If you're in a company, sometimes it's about, hey, what about the culture, the context, or someone that is a little bit more different than me, that like is going
Mhm.
to flex that other side of me, where we actually don't align, and you are on this side of the spectrum and I'm over here, but where can we meet in the middle? And like,
Yeah.
what are the things that you do? So I think that too is, can incorporate into that imposter syndrome of like, I don't want to ask someone to be my mentor. I don't want to, because what if I mess up, or what if, they don't have time for me and all of a sudden we don't meet anymore? And so
Yeah.
there's things that roll into that. But I do think that for the most part, people are, they want to help, especially women. Like, if I'm it brings me so much joy, because I want to heal my little Stephanie, where like,
Yeah.
I had those moments in the past and I pushed through and I was okay, and like this is what I learned from it, and not everything's going to be easy. And so you just kind of, I think, having that sounding board and the reassurance is so helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I think that um boy, I lost my train of thought there. Um, no, yeah, being afraid to ask is a hard thing. Like that's probably and like you said, so many people are ready to help you. So getting
Mhm.
over that imposter syndrome of, am I even good enough to be mentored? Is this
Yeah.
person going to take me on because I look up to them, or they have something I think I would benefit from, and being ready for that too. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
to your point, don't just ask to ask, be ready for that mentorship and be ready to make that change. Like you said, be ready. You mentioned a long time ago and we didn't touch on it, but constructive criticism, when you ask for it, be ready for it, cause you want to use it. And so it's not going to be, and finding that person that does it well with
Yes.
you. So that safe space of like, I trust them. They're going to, like you mentioned with Crystal, we're going to have back and forth, but I know it's always coming from a place of love, and that she's not going to just yell at me or give me bad advice, that this really is something she cares about me, and this is going to be something that's meaningful. So I should perk up and listen, even though it might not be comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Finding that person. Anything else? I know we're kind of up on time, and I appreciate you coming on and chatting today. Anything else that we want to impart?
I don't know. I don't have any other words of wisdom or pearls. Um, but I just think, like I said at the beginning, I was nervous for whatever reason to do this, but I also knew that I was going to have so much fun. And I remember, last week I thought, oh, the whole practicing thing. I was like, oh, maybe I'm going to record myself, and maybe I'm going to, kind of just like test runs and do all of these things. And I thought, you know what? No, because I'm the type of person where if I say too much stuff out loud, it's like it comes out and it's gone. It's just gone. And I was like, I want to push myself to have an organic conversation and that spontaneous speaking. And now I've done it. And I feel so good about it, to be honest. Like, I feel like I felt comfortable, had to change rooms and Wi-Fi and all that stuff, but like, it's okay. Like, it's fine. There's just so many things where I'm like, no,
let it happen.
Yeah. And it feels so much better because then you're like, I did that. Like, I accomplished it. And I think that, I'm speaking, I'm doing a virtual session for Doug at the end of the month. And I'm doing one of the meetups, like virtually with Nancy. And then we have DynamicsCon, and like, I have all these things where I'm just kind of like, I'm coming into my own, and like, I'm really trying to embrace the things that bring me joy and let those lift me up rather than all the noise that's, around me. And I think that, I don't know, I always say that you can't love others until you love yourself. And the same is true in business, where if you're not true to yourself and you're not doing the things that actually bring you joy, of course, like, everything else is not going to feel right. Or of course, everything else isn't going to go well because you're not in it, like your heart's in it. And so I really think that and it takes time. I don't think everyone gets that, even though I'm sure what's the generation now? There's Gen X, Gen Z.
I didn't know. Yeah. I think it's Gen Z now. Yeah.
I don't know.
We might have moved past Gen Z even. Yeah. I'm way back there.
Young kids now, it's like, no, I'm going, and all these influencers, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I can barely like record myself for, random things. But I do think that that's kind of, for me, like, the takeaway when I was thinking about today is, but it's what I like to do. So like, why don't I just allow myself to enjoy it instead of holding myself back? And I feel like I did. So I'm really proud of myself.
Yeah. No, a perfect way to end, Stephanie. I appreciate having you on, and I look forward to seeing you. Like I said, hopefully a couple times here pretty soon at DynamicsCon in May, and then again in Toronto in June. So I'm excited and excited to see you speak again. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
Did you unplug the repeater? Oh yeah, I was cleaning, or I didn't know what that thing was for.
When they have to reconnect, and it's like, every time I have to ask my mom, what is your password? I immediately cringe a little bit inside before asking. So I'm like, I don't want to ask because I know that she just has this note in her phone full of stuff. I'm like,
I know.
Information security would love you, but like, it's okay.
I know. My mom's hers is in a book. It's like a physical notebook, but it's also like just whatever odd page she chooses to write in at that moment. So like, do you remember what your password is for AOL? And she's like, yeah, I think it's this one. Oh no, that was 7 years ago. She's just going through it.
Try this, try that, capital.
Yeah, try this, try that. It's like,
oh my god, and then you don't want to reset it. So.